When I was pregnant, I learned that I had to carry around a bottle of water with me wherever I went. And I paid when I didn't because I would be so thirsty that I almost couldn't stand it. And now that Zoe is here, my daughter, I've kind of fallen out of that habit. And I notice that I'm places and I reach for my bottle of water because I'm thirsty and I don't have it. When's the last time you were thirsty? When's the last time you reached for a bottle of water? Our story today in the Gospel of John is all about this living water. It takes place around a well. Jesus is going out of his way to have this interaction with a woman. She's a Samaritan woman. And in doing so, Jesus is breaking two pretty significant boundaries. Jews didn't often interact with Samaritans. Think about the people who you would least like to interact with, and that was what the relationship between Jews and Samaritans were like. And then this is a woman, and Jesus and her are alone at this well, and that would have been seen as pretty uncouth for a rabbi to be alone with a woman, especially at a well, which carries symbolic significance for marriage, right? It's uncouth for Jesus to be doing this, but yet he does it anyway. And they have this conversation, and in the first 15 verses, Jesus brings up something pretty profound. He says to the woman, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink at this well, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water." So the woman is getting water for herself to quench her own thirst. And Jesus is saying, if you only knew who you were talking to, you would be asking me for living water that you would never thirst again. This idea of living water is a theme that can be traced all the way from the first pages of the Bible to the very last pages of the Bible. In the beginning, humans were put in this garden where there was a stream of water flowing from the very presence of God, and they had access to it 24/7. And then in the fall story of Genesis 3, humans are taken outside of the garden and put back into the wilderness, back into a dry, parched land. They're separated from the waters of life that are in the garden. Later in the prophets, the prophet Ezekiel in chapter 37 is going to talk about Israel. They've turned away from God, just like in the fall story. They've turned away from God, and as a result, they're like a valley of dry, dead bones. There's no water whatsoever. And God says, he prophesies about a time that's coming in the future where he's going to pour out his spirit and all over these bones, and they're going to come back to life. It's water language. God's going to pour out his spirit over these dry bones and bring them back to life. Then, in the story here, Jesus comes, and it's like he's telling the Samaritan woman that he is the water of life. He is the means by which we can go back to the garden and once again have access to the waters of life, the very thing that sustains us in the wilderness. Going back to the Israelites, when they were in the wilderness and they were thirsty, God provided water for them. So in all of this theme, we're looking for the way that we can have that access to the waters of life. We, of course, thirst on a very physical sense, right? We all get thirsty. Like I had to carry around my bottle of water. But thirst in the Bible also became this way of talking about what we long for deep inside of us. It's what we yearn to have, what could quench our thirsts. We have all kinds of desires for things. And Jesus is telling this woman that the one thing that you should desire most of all is to be with Jesus, to drink from him, to learn from him, to experience him, to do life with him. Because when you do that, when you drink from Jesus, that's the thing that will satisfy you. And we shouldn't be surprised by this. We have a similar idea today when you talk about how thirsty are you, or are you thirsty, or she's thirsty. Like, you know what that's talking about. And while the meaning is different for what the Israelites would have thought of, the core idea at the heart of it is the same. You're thirsty. You're longing for something. You desire something. What are you thirsty for? This week, what do you find yourself longing for and desiring for? And I think what Jesus is saying to you and to me today is that if you answer that question with anything other than God's very presence, then Jesus and living in that way, then you're always going to be left thirsty. You're going to be unsatisfied. Your thirst is never going to be quenched, or maybe it will be quenched for a little while, but you're always going to have to keep coming back to the well. The only thing that can satisfy our thirst, really, is getting back to the garden. On the cross, later in John, we'll read about this story where a soldier pierces the side of Jesus and water comes spilling out. And we could try and explain it in all these different scientific ways, and many people have tried, and maybe there is a great explanation for that. But what I think John is doing is reminding us that when Jesus' side is pierced, when he is on the cross, and when he gives up his life, it's like there's streams of water that flow from him back out into the earth. It's through Jesus' death, through doing life with him, that we can get back to being in the garden, in the midst of God's life-giving presence. And then on the very last page of the Bible, we read about the new Jerusalem, this new creation that we all can look forward to, where there'll be no more tears, no more mourning, any of that thing, no more death, right? And what are we told? There's a river that flows from God himself, from the throne of God, and it goes to water the whole earth. Once again, humans are right in the center. They're back to the garden, in the presence of life, of God's life-giving waters. So again, what does this do for you today? What are you thirsty for? And again, if you answer anything other than God, you should wrestle with this week. Does that actually satisfy you? And if the answer is no, if you find yourself feeling thirsty again and again and again, then why not try this week to come and drink from Jesus? Spend a little more time with him, maybe in prayer. Maybe it's reading more of the scripture or sitting in it and actually meditating it, not just reading the story once through. What does it look like for you this week? How do you need to drink from Jesus? Because it's only then that we can be truly satisfied and find our life.